right. All right, so I want to pick up. So for those of you all who are seeing this for the first time, I'm pulling this up on the screen. This is my exam prep manual. This is my old one. I'm updating it, and it's taken me a while, but I am updating it. As soon as I update it, then it'll be available for me to send out to you all. So I use this for test prep, and then also I use my notes as well. So if this is your first time with me, then what I like to do is I like to review the information, give you an overall broad stroke of the information, because it's your responsibility to really study it, and then have you to write that information down. I'm not big on giving out handouts and paper. I just found that you learn better when you're able to see it, write it, and hear it at the same time. Sometimes when you're just reading off paper, it's a little bit more difficult to digest the information. And I think at the same time, you ought to be developing your own personal study guide from your notes that you've been writing down. That's what's going to help you from your exam, that you got a bunch of things that you wrote down or points to remember. Because what happens is if you have a study guide, which you need, you reading somebody else's information and then their wording of how to understand the concept. When you write it based on your own understanding. So it's going to be more familiar to you when you write it yourself. So I like that approach, and I found that it's helpful. All right, so I want to pick up with somebody that all of y'all are familiar with, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Stages of Death and Dying. We all have to know it, not just for the sake of having a healthy practice, but we all need to know it because it is going to be on somebody's exam, right? And so remember, the exams are nationally based exams, and there's only 4 of them. So you don't know which 4 that you're going to get. So one may be heavy laden with these type of questions, and you may get an exam and don't have this on here at all, right? But we got to be prepared for it. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Stages of Grief and Loss, are how I remember them as DABDA: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Remember that these stages of dying are not just for death, but they're also for grief as well. So somebody doesn't necessarily have to have lost somebody. They can just be grieving and go through these steps. We also remember for our exam that these steps don't have to happen chronologically or sequentially. They can happen at different stages and at different times. But the idea based on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is that some point or another, somebody may be given to one of these stages as a way of coping with their grief and with their loss, right? So she said that a person may start in the denial stage, right? And so remember, denial is a defense mechanism. It's the most widely used defense mechanism there is, denial. And she said from there, somebody may move on to anger, where they may get angry at God or whoever their higher power is. And they may find it very difficult to relate to the person that's dying. You see a lot of this in hospice. Why are you leaving me? You can imagine a 30-year-old couple with 2 kids. The husband's dying from cancer. This young lady is going to be left with kids to raise by herself. She can be prone to anger, and justifiably. And then she says, well, people may move, just assuming we're moving through these stages sequentially, to bargaining. But that person may want to strike a deal with God or others, if we can keep this person from dying. And then eventually they move into depression, which can really turn into a clinical type of depression, where counseling, therapy, and sometimes medication is needed. And then stage 5 is a stage that in therapy, we want to try to get people to acceptance. right? So that's when that struggle of the grief and the loss has brought that person to a place to where they can move on in their life. So remember, for your exam, the grieving process, and we know it's different for every person, and we know that, right? But for your exam and for DSM-5 purposes, remember, grieving after 12 months, we consider that clinically significant. It means that there is an ongoing issue that we need to attend to. In other words, as a normal time frame, we give people at least a year to grieve. If it goes past a year, then that's what we call clinically significant, and there's probably other issues going on. Now, sometimes it takes people a little bit longer than a year to grieve. In particular, it depends on the situation. Somebody gets in a car accident, loses their husband and all their kids. That might be longer than a year, but we're talking about for your exam purposes. Anything outside of a year, it's clinically significant. We say something may be wrong.
Can you give an example of that?
Yeah. I'll just use the example that I just used. A wife gets into a car accident with her husband and her 2 children, and all of them die except her. And so she's not able to, and so we know all of the symptoms of depression. Let's just use that diagnosis. So she has those classic symptoms. What are some of the symptoms of depression? Y'all give them to me.
Loss of appetite.
Yeah.
Loss of sleep.
Yeah.
Or too much of either one.
Yes.
Fatigue.
Fatigue.
Yes. Body pain. I've known folks with body issues.
Yes.
Withdrawal.
What's the scariest?
Not having hope. And
suicidal.
Yeah.
That'll lead to something else.
Suicidal.
Yeah. So suicidal thoughts, right? So all of those characteristics y'all just named, this lady's having that. And so we say that's normal for her to have these things in her life for the first year. When she gets outside of a year, then we say, okay, something's wrong. This lady hadn't been able to move on. Right? Doesn't mean that all of those symptoms are gone, but it does mean that she can't move on in those 3 domains in her life: home, community, and her vocation. Home, community, and her vocation. She's not being able to move on and be successful in those 3 areas of her life. We say that's clinically significant. And then that's when it becomes problematic, because by a year, she should be able to go back to work and be okay. She should be able to reintegrate herself into her community, right? And so she should be able to function at home. So that's what we mean inside of that year. So inside of that year, it's normal expectations that it's going to be a struggle working, maybe a struggle, going and visiting other family members or other things that remind her of her family. We expect that. But outside of that year.
So one quick question with that one, because of that, if that scenario that you just gave, if that was the case, how long would y'all give her? Like you're saying 12 months, it would be okay for her to go past that. So what would be the moment when it's not okay no more for a person that had that much loss?
So for your exam, after 12 months is too long. Okay. Yeah, if it was just normal situations and circumstances, we know it's probably going to take more than 12 months. But for your exam, anything after 12 months, I don't care what happened to you, it's clinically significant.
Okay.
Yeah.
So after 12 months, she needs an evaluation.
Yes. If she still can't function in those areas, right. And so.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
This is not the same thing with this in particular, but what if you have this person that around that same time every year, not just at the death of that person, but let's say that entire month leading up to that month, they know, I mean, it has been like 10 years, but they're like seriously grieving over this person for about a month and a half roughly, but close to that time of death. What is that considered?
Yeah, and I was going to get to that. And so that is considered normal. That's seasonal depression. Or there's like 3 different terms. So seasonal depression, or what they call cyclical depression because it's on a cycle. Or you may also hear it coined seasonal affective disorder. All of it's the same. That just simply means at this same time of the year, you get triggered, and then you display all of those symptoms over and over again. And so we do consider that normal. That's normal.
Can you repeat that? You say you consider what normal?
So if somebody cycles their depression, like somebody died on a certain day, so every day that year they go through depression, that's normal. But they can come out of it, after that time frame is over, right? After that birthday is passed, after that anniversary day is passed, they get back to life as usual. That's normal. And so any good clinician, therapist, or doctor will always have that person to have a plan, a seasonal plan leading up to that time, especially if it gets real bad or they get clinically suicidal. There'll be a plan. So there's some people that's happened to, that it's been 30 years and their symptoms are still the same. Like every year, it's the same symptoms, but it's normal because they still can function in those 3 areas of their life, right? It's when they can't for an extended period of time that we have a problem. That's a great question. Any other questions concerning that? I know that's more assessment and diagnosis, but that's a great question. Because the assumption here is in Kubler-Ross's theory is that in stage 4 is some type of mental illness. But normally and generally, that depression is more bereavement, right? Not major depressive disorder. That's more bereaving. But once you get outside of that year, then we're looking at serious diagnosis there, and which is usually going to be major depression. And there's all types of subtypes under that major depression just based on what's going on with that person. Or we'll see if we're going to move into seasonal depression. You won't ever know until that year cycles. All right. Questions about that. So remember that for your exam, DABDA, D-A-B-D-A, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. All right. I'm not gonna go over that. Write this down just for, especially if you're taking the LCSW, because there is little tidbits with veterans on there. So just in case you run into it, I do want you to have the information. So we know veterans suffer from serious mental illnesses. So whenever you see the acronym SMI, that means serious mental illness. What are some of the diagnoses that we see with veterans?
PTSD,
Post-traumatic.
Yes. What else?
bipolar,
Mm-hmm.
Schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
TBI, traumatic brain injury.
Yes. And it's one more. It has to do with sex, abuse.
Oh, sexual assault. The sexual assault victim.
So if you're not familiar, there's a term called MST, military sexual trauma.
Yeah.
That is a huge thing. I used to work for the federal government with combat veterans. That is a huge deal in the military.
Mhm.
And it used to be primarily women. It's not just women anymore. Right, so military sexual trauma, PTSD, depression, TBI. Those are gonna be my big ones, traumatic brain injury. A lot of these veterans, a lot of times they don't even have to go into battle. It can just be basic training to just the normal course of their work. They get injured, they're working with this heavy machinery. You know, they bump into things fall on them. They have a lot of head injuries. And so there is,
Serving too many tours,
Yeah.
and then the bomb explosions. That's how I
Yeah.
learned about it.
yes.
What was the name you stated at first? You said SI?
SMI. So whenever you see that acronym SMI, it means serious mental illnesses. So you know the DSM-5 has all of these disorders in there. All of them aren't considered SMIs. So the SMIs are the serious mental illnesses. That's depression. You don't have to know this for your exam. You just need to know it in case you see the acronym. So that's depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, schizoaffective disorder, and I say schizophrenia. I think there's like 5.
Schizophreniform?
Uh,
Is there one?
not really until it becomes schizophrenia. But yeah, those are considered like the major ones. And they call them SMIs because those are usually lifelong. All right. So some of the therapies that you use with military veterans. CBT, y'all are familiar with that. Solution focused therapy, that's short term. There's a therapy called ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. Narrative therapy. Anybody remember what narrative therapy is? And who I would use that for?
It's like when they start telling the stories over and over until it just becomes numb to them.
With the elderly population?
Yeah, so allowing storytelling, and that's going to be primarily used in the elderly population. You know, they would rather,
Native Americans too.
yes, they would rather say, you know, start the conversation. 1968, I remember going off to, and so if you're not careful, you'll think they're not sharing valuable information, but they are. So you have to pull out the clinical implications out of that conversation. So we allow them to tell their story. That's one of the things I enjoy with working with the veterans. They can tell some stories. Families and couples therapy, and then a real popular evidence-based program, evidence-based model that's out right now. And if you don't know what it is, I encourage you to go research it because you will need to know. EMDR and ACT as well. EMDR is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. That's really on the rise, and I heard that it's really effective. I was supposed to get some training in it and I missed it. But that's big with veterans and it's big with the VA.
Tell me again, what did ACT mean?
Acceptance and commitment therapy. It's a real intensive type of therapy that's used with trauma and like significant levels of abuse. All right. Let's talk about abuse and neglect. So we know some of the implications for abuse and neglect. The mental health disorders from people who've been through that type of situation, whether it's a physical, emotional, sexual, we know that the numbers go through the roof as far as those individuals having some type of mental health disorder. So there's all type of mental health problems, behavioral problems. Those individuals who come out of those types of situations where it's really been traumatizing and chronic have coexisting conditions and comorbid disorders, usually going to be some type of mental health disorder and substance abuse issue. And why are they using the substance abuse? Why are they using the substances?
You asking that question?
And
Mhm.
self-medicating.
And to
Self-medicating.
escape some of the thoughts.
Right.
To be-
Absolutely. So a lot of it is self-medication. They struggle with relationships and there's an increased likelihood of developing RAD, which is reactive attachment disorder. And we'll talk more about that and when we get to assessment and diagnosis. So a lot of the kids that come through the foster care system, and this may be an exam question, a lot of those kids who come through the foster care system have reactive attachment disorder. I'm going to be safe to say if they've been abused in any type of way, especially sexually, they're probably going to have RAD. It's the common diagnosis that comes with abuse of kids. So classic stuff y'all know about physical abuse, welts, broken bones, burns, injuries to various parts of the body and internal injuries. So a lot of times you'll see exam questions saying that Sarah is wearing long sleeves, never shows her arms and her legs. We know that that's doesn't mean that it is abuse, but there's a possibility that she may be covering up some physical injuries. Sexual abuse as well. So please know these symptoms. You don't have to know all of them, but I know these because it is on your exam. They are interested in us knowing the signs of sexual abuse. So some things that might be prevalent doesn't mean that sexual abuse is happening. It does mean that red flags are raised, and we can look into it. But if we start seeing most of these things being met in a kid's life, in a person's life, then there probably is some sexual abuse. So the kid just inadvertently talking about sexually related topics, and nobody was talking about that before the child started having a conversation. Deliberately drawing sexually related pictures, interacting in sexual nature with animals and toys, especially with younger kids, because they can't necessarily verbalize their pain or their problems or their trauma, so they have to act them out. Excessive masturbation, and we know that that's developmentally appropriate for kids at certain ages, but there is a point to where that it can become excessive, it can become an issue. Refusing to be left alone, enuresis or encaprices. And so we know the evidence suggests that kids who've been sexually abused feel like they've lost control over their sexual parts and over their body parts. And so a lot of times what they'll do is to gain some sense of control back, they'll take their feces and smear it on the wall, or they'll just urinate all over the place and urinate on themselves. It gives them some sense of control. The kid may fear a lead offender or fear specific genders. Young boys may set fires or be cruel to animals. There may be some role reversal in the family. Sleep disturbances. Some of the girls sometimes have eating disorders or practice self-mutilation. You'll see a lot of times girls who've been sexually abused, they cut. For some reason, that's their way of self-soothing. Runaways, criminal activity, getting involved in substance abuse, depression, just difficulty relating with other people, difficulty in relationships, school difficulties, all of those can be signs. Once again, doesn't mean if you see these signs that sexual abuse has occurred, but if you see enough of these signs happening in the same person's life, it's probably an indication that it's there.
And I wanted to add, when I see children with no boundaries at all,
Yeah.
That's one of my questions, is the sexual abuse.
I agree. I agree.
You said because they don't have any boundaries? That's what our question was? I'm sorry.
Yeah, she was making a statement. She was adding to this list saying a lot of times when she see kids that don't have boundaries, that kind of clues her in. That's something maybe
Right.
going on. Mhm. Yeah, we see a lot of that in the role reversal. They mentioned that is one of the things that you may see from sexual abuse. And so you may see and say kid has been abused by her father sexually. Sometimes that young girl would take on the role of a mother. And so not only will she, gain oversight of her brothers and sisters, but she'll act as a mate to her father. But when she get out in the environment, in the school setting, in the community, she's taking on that mantra that she's an adult. So she may not have, an awareness of authority figures and what she can and can't do. Those boundaries aren't there. And Fritz Perls talked about that in Gestalt therapy. He said that's one of the ways that we can tell that people aren't emotionally healthy. He said when they don't have an awareness of boundaries. They don't know where they start and where other people stop, or where other people stop and they start. So kids will climb on you, crawl on you. It just a lot of times it's just sad to see, but they don't know that there's supposed to be a personal space between me and you. And so I know about that. Y'all know my story. I've been sexually abused before and molested. So I know that this is true. So when you're young and you're impressionable, adults are supposed to teach you those things. And so if they don't teach you things like boundaries and how to in personal space and stuff like that, and the abuse comes in, your brain will solidify that as the norm. And so you'll be looking for it in every relationship. So, sometimes when people don't understand that, they may see a kid or a young girl and say, oh, she's so fast, she's so promiscuous and stuff like that, and write those kids off. But they don't know that that's the blueprint that's been written in her mind. So she's looking for that in relationships because the person that was doing that to her told her that they loved her, right? So she equates that love with that type of movement with the body. So she's not just being fast, she's just looking for love. Sex is just a byproduct. I help guys who are trapped in sexual issues understand that as well. Sex, a lot of times when you're in that situation, is just a byproduct. They're actually looking for the affirmation, the confirmation, but the sex comes with it. We also know that part of sexual abuse as well, kids get groomed. So there are stages to that. So number one, engagement, where the perpetrator gains access to and this is going to be a test question for somebody. The perpetrator gains access to the child through grooming them for the abuse. So they might not start off with the abuse at first, but it's usually going to be somebody that the kid trusts, right? So they're younger, they may give them toys. They're older, they may give them money, or they may threaten them. Say, if you tell anybody, I'm gonna hurt your mom, things like that. Usually though, they kind of get them with honey instead of vinegar. Then number two is the pressured sex. They make them feel obligated to perform the act, forced sex. They force them into the act. Then there's the secrecy phase, where there's bribes, the intimidation, the blackmails, just to keep it secret. And sometimes people carry this to their grave, or when you hear older people, and in particular, if you're using that narrative therapy type of situation, they'll talk about this. They'll be, 70, 80 years old and say, this was a family secret. When I was growing up, we didn't talk about stuff like this. Or my mom knew, my uncle knew, but we didn't talk about it. Right? We just understood. So sometimes people take that all the way into their adulthood, and sometimes to their grave.
And
number five,
I wanted,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I wanted to make a comment about that.
Mhm.
That's one issue that I think I try to address, that sweeping things under the rug does not resolve the issue. So that's what I've learned in my culture as well, even within my family. But again, my issue is if we don't talk about it, it becomes a cycle. It continues versus, to me, talking about it to address it. So I totally hear what you're saying for as, 80 years old, then you tell what happened to you, but then you find out it also happened to your sister, your brother, your cousin with the same person, and no one said anything.
Yeah. I think this generation is for the most part better at having conversations with their kids about this. But it's still a lot of secrecy around this. And you're right. Usually, this comes out a lot in the therapy sessions that I have. But usually, you're right, Carol. It's when that person actually says something or mentions it to somebody in the family, then you realize it was 2 or 3 other, kids that it was happening to, and they're all adults now. So it's rarely only one person. Usually only one person.
But when you say that it's more talked about now, I think it's more talked about in families where the education is there. But if you still have families that's not educated and they still keep that stuff, like a lot of the families that we deal with in inner city, they still hold that stuff and they tell the kids, just stay from around that person as if that's gonna be, it's okay now that just don't go around him, like that's excusing him to be who he is. But that's not a good answer to give a child. Like, I'm telling you that this happened to me and all you can tell me is just don't go around him. So you're approving what he did and saying that it's okay. Just don't put myself in that situation.
Yeah,
So,
and that was the information that they were giving as kids.
that's it. So if they're educated, they are doing better. If they're not, they're still doing the same thing.
Right. Yeah, that stuff is that way of dealing with it is outdated and irrelevant now. And with the it really is it is a movement. This Me Too movement. These people are telling.
Yeah, they are telling it now.
They coming out and saying, no, Uncle Jimmy wasn't right. And then once one person builds that courage, these people are coming out. And one of the things that I'm seeing now, and I need to look at more literature on it, these individuals, these perpetrators that are getting found out now, a lot of them are committing suicide. So that's an interesting phenomenon.
Can't handle the pressure.
Yeah.
But I want to say one more thing. I lost my train of thought. I don't think about it. Oh, what I wanted to say was I try to have a lot of compassion when I do meet people or children that struggle with their sexuality or identity, because you never know what trauma that person has endured that has kind of changed their thinking or their choices in life. So that's one thing I've learned through social work is you never know what they experience at 5 or 6 or 7.
That's right.
And now they, are having all these issues.
That's right. Well, we know the literature suggests 1 out of every 3 American child has been physically, sexually, or emotionally abused. That's 33%. So there's a huge chance that the person that you're talking to, it's happened to them. So you're right. We absolutely got to be compassionate and thoughtful and responsive to those types of situations. Thinking in the back of my mind, there's probably some trauma there. And then we came up with these old adages that didn't really help us. If it didn't hurt us, if it didn't kill us, it made us better. That's not true.
It made us stronger.
Yeah, we just
Got
said
the
it.
thought.
Yeah, they'll put your butt on social media now and get caught.
Yes.
So there's the disclosure phase, abuse is found out, then the suppression phase. And that's when I think you said that, I think maybe Teresa said, I'm not sure who said that, the child is encouraged to forget about the abuse. And that's always a sad situation because the moment we do that, the child feels like they're the issue. They're the problem.
And that's when the behaviors start to come out and everybody's looking like, why are they doing this and but you don't see all the stuff they've been through.
That's right. Then there's neglect. That's when we may some of those signs and symptoms are slower than normal physical development as a result of malnourishment, delayed mental development, medical problems that really could have been treated by just getting the kid to the doctor. They become serious, poor school performance, just due to frequent absences. I saw a lot of this when I worked at DCFS. Poor social skills, just because kids don't have access to the right types of environment, not being properly taken care of, ADLs not being met. And then in real severe cases, death, because the kid was starved to death or they were exposed to something that they shouldn't have been. So this is just as serious as something like sexual abuse and physical abuse. So the most underdiagnosed type of abuse, which is a test question, is emotional abuse. And this is more underdiagnosed because it doesn't have necessarily physical symptoms, though it does have physical reactions, right? So this is when you belittle, shame, humiliate, calling names, telling a kid that they're worthless, yelling, threatening, bullying, especially when a child is younger and their mind is more impressionable. They really begin to embrace those comments, those ideas, and that begins to shape their self-esteem. And then they become vulnerable to other predators later on in their life. Narcissists are drawn to, antisocials are drawn to people who have been emotionally abused. They are drawn to them. They can sniff them out and continue to take advantage of them. I have not had one person, I work with a bunch of them. Listen, I work with some people, like if I tell you their names, you probably, you would know them because they're that famous and they're in other states. But you would say, how in the world are you dating this guy who tells you this and does this to you, and you famous, right? But you would be surprised how emotionally beat down that they are starting from childhood. It was a gradual process of people just wearing down on their self-esteem. And so sometimes what you see in the public persona is really a social mask. You get these people at home or you get them in therapy, they have very, very little value of themselves. So narcissists and antisocials prey on that. And so they try to make them feel like I'm your sense of self-worth. And it's just a sad thing to see. I saw a lady who lost a guy who walked away from her. She was burning candles. She had went to a witch doctor to try to get him back. She paid a psychic. She had like his hair. She was doing all type of weird stuff. But she felt like if she didn't have this guy, she was nothing. And this lady was a lawyer making big money, had beautiful, beautiful children and all that, but he had wore her down, so she's like, if I don't have him, I'm not whole, I'm not a person. So we see that. So we know we make, we are mandated reporters. I'm not gonna go into that, but we are mandated to report child abuse. We're also mandated to report elder abuse to APS, Adult Protective Services. Has anybody had to do that? I've never done that before. You have? Okay. All right, let me move on. So what's not in here, and which is actually an update in my manual, so I'm going to give this to you out of my notes. I want to review really quickly because it is on the exam, human trafficking. So I just want to give you a few notes there.
I wanted to say something before you move on to this part. When I was a disability worker with Aging and Disability Services, the main one I would have to report all the time was that financial, boy. I mean, tearing those seniors up, taking their homes, taking over their bank account, forging their names. It is ugly.
Who was
While
doing
leaving
that?
them in the nursing home.
Family, friends, people that take advantage of seniors, elder abuse. Yeah, financial is just not beating and neglecting them, or a nursing home not changing them, or finding sores on a parent when you go visit them in a nursing home. But the main one that I saw the most was the financial abuse, tearing them up, just draining their bank accounts.
That probably is the primary one.
Yeah.
That's number one. That's the number one
Yeah.
type of abuse for the elderly, financial abuse. Yeah, they drop them off at the nursing home, and they get power of attorney before they put them there, and then they have access to everything.
And then if they drop them off at the nursing home want everything.
They do.
They want everything for from the time that you got it.
They
want
do.
everything.
They do. Yes, it's sad to see because some of these people have worked their whole lives, and their kids go into their 401ks, they go into their Roth IRAs, they go under their mattress, and in a matter of months and years, it's gone.
Well, I worked at this methadone clinic when I lived in Texas, and this lady, her mom died, and they were well-to-do family, and she had a policy like for like $500,000. That's what they left her, and she was well off, and she was using drugs, and she spent that money. It sounds crazy because I still can't wrap my mind around it. She spent that money in a 6-month time frame. She said she was buying drugs for everybody. She was having parties every night. People was coming over. She had all the friends in the world. But when she spent that last dollar, nobody could get her high and nobody wanted to be around her. And that's when she was coming to see us. But you spent your family worked all their lives. That's why I be thinking you done worked all your life trying to prepare something for your children to have. And they spent it in 6 months when you went without some stuff trying to make sure that they have.
Wow.
And I wanted to make a comment. Another issue with elderly abuse, which I have been involved with personally with my mom, who's 77, is opportunists. People that befriend your family and not knowingly take everything. And it's shocking because you actually trust these people. My mom is a very trusting person. She's always giving cake, giving this, giving a ride. But I totally understand the family thing because it's also been personal, where I would never think something like that could happen, but it happens. And it's really sad because, like someone said, you've spent your whole life working for a home or for a car or whatever you have. And for someone to take advantage, it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's unfortunate. All right. Y'all need a couple of minutes of a break, or you good?
I'm gonna take one. Everybody else don't have to. I'm just gonna take a
Okay,
quick one.
let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back.
Okay.
All right. So let's get into, I want to give you all a few notes on human trafficking. So I'll go slower because I know you all are writing. But I do want to share some things that I think that'll be on your exam. There is an administration through DHH. It's called the Office on Trafficking in Persons. It's called OTTP, Office of Tracking in Persons. This is the governmental entity that oversees human trafficking. So this department has come up with risk factors for human trafficking that we should know. So some of these risk factors are runaway, number one, runaway and homeless youth. So on your exam, if they ask you, what is the number one risk factor for human trafficking? It's kids who are runaway or homeless. Why do y'all think that might be?
They're more vulnerable and they don't have nobody to protect them.
And they need somewhere to rest and they need something to eat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So runaway and homeless youth, foreign nationals. Number three, kids.
Can you repeat that?
Foreign nationals. Like maybe kids who come over from Mexican border.
You said foreign?
Foreign, like a foreign country.
Okay.
Mhm.
And what else? National?
Foreign nationals. Number three, and these are children and adults. So children and adults who are forced into sexual labor services. Number four, people who are victims of trauma, sexual assault, social discrimination, and war.
I think I had a moment.
You were breaking up
I
here.
used to work at a group home I used to work at a group home in Memphis, Tennessee, and the girls would run like races, but I would hear them say they were preparing to run away from the group home and they were going to pimps. And I had never heard that language before, like who runs to pimps? But now that you're saying that, it's because they were victims of trauma, sexual assault, and discrimination at home because home was traumatic, they went to group homes, but they had that knowledge where to go or who would take care of them, when in actuality they were being abused again.
Yeah, absolutely. And in those kids' eyes, they don't see them as pimps. They don't even call them pimps.
These kids did, and this was back in 2001. I was just shocked to hear that term. Like, who says that?
Yeah.
But that was the term they used.
Well, they don't use that much more. They think it's their boyfriends and their saviors now.
Yeah.
So.
But that was the culture there. Because like I said, I was shocked to hear that word, and I was just like who says that? But yeah.
Yeah. I helped the FBI a couple of years ago get some girls out of and their mother out of some sex trafficking over here on Morehouse Drive. And to them, it was just a normal way of life. Their mom was in it, and then she raised her two girls in it. And they were really kind of distraught when we kind of broke up the little situation that they had going on, because that was their livelihood. That's where they got everything from. And these girls, I think one was 15 and one was 13. But ever since they were little girls, that's what they've done. So it wasn't even a big deal to them. Sad.
And you messed them up when you told them that it was wrong.
And I knew I was messing them up when I was helping the FBI. Like I knew I was, because I've been in that world before. So I knew the repercussions of that. But I know statistically and by experience where they were going to end up if there was no intervention. And I know they didn't know that. Like this is nothing you retire from.
And that's when they tell you the benefit outweighs the risk.
Yeah, it retires you. It retires you. And so when those pimps start seeing you as invaluable and you're not able to run the books, then all types of stuff start happening to you. So, and then the last risk factor was individuals living in poverty. So based on the OTTP, these are some of the indicators that a kid may be getting trafficked. So number one, if a kid has stopped attending school and is engaged in commercial sex acts. There's a bunch of them, but I'm only going to give you the ones I think that are going to be on your exam. Number two.
Before you say number two, what was the last part of the first one?
Has engaged in commercial sex acts. Carol, OTT standing for Office on Trafficking in Persons.
And when you say commercial sex act, is that just like filming themselves or something? What makes it commercial? Okay.
Filming themselves or getting filmed.
Okay.
Number 2, if you see a lot of hotel keys or key cards, there may be an indication based on their research. Also, if there's chronic lying about their age or carrying around false IDs. Once again, doesn't mean you see these things that they're being trafficked, but these are strong indicators. Also, if they have sexually explicit profiles on their social networking sites, sexually explicit profiles on their social networking sites. I get a lot of that. I think I probably get one, if not every day, every other day on Facebook from some young girl inviting me to her site. If not every day, every other day. I actually, about 3 days ago, I turned off my notifications on Facebook. It was either that or the cryptocurrency. But these girls are getting younger and younger. Also, if someone has untreated STDs, untreated STDs, also, if the person seems to be coached into what to say about alleged abuse. It's not an organic response. Somebody told them what to say. Or just say you fell off the ladder. Or just say you hit your head on the edge of the bed. But there's no consistency with what you're seeing. The next one is quite obvious when that person tries to protect their pimp or their trafficker from authorities.
Protect their pimp or what?
Or trafficker from authorities. I learned this one as well. So y'all already may know this, but pimps and traffickers do brand their victims. And usually the branding is on the neck or the lower back. And usually is both. Not all the time, but usually it's both. You see it on the neck, like the side of the neck. And if they wear like the little half shirts, you'll see it on their lower back. And I think those are the major ones I think you should know for your exam. Just know that human sex trafficking is a billion-dollar business. It is very organized. It is very real for the architects. And Shreveport is a hub for trafficking. We are a drop-off and pickup spot. I worked with a 13-year-old girl who got shot a couple months ago, shot and killed. But I worked with her when she was in this group home, and she was on her way from school, and two of her friends made a deal with the trafficker. While she was walking home from school, they grabbed her and put her in a van and trafficked her to Texas. And she was there for 3 days. And I asked her what happened. And she said they drugged her really bad. They kept her high. She stayed in a dark room for 3 days, and all she knew, as far as what she could remember in the cloudiness of being high, was people coming in and out of the room, having intercourse with her. And she said what happened is she just assumed that the window in that room was locked, and it wasn't. And so she escaped through the window and ended up coming back to Shreveport. And, all the problems and issues that come with that happening to you start happening to her. And so she went back to school, and the same guys were still at the school and told her that we're gonna get you again.
Oh my God.
I'm sorry. These guys were
Students.
adults? Students? You said she was 13?
She was 13. She was 13.
They the main recruiters.
But why were they still allowed to be there to tell her that?
Mm-hmm.
Because she didn't tell on them.
Yeah.
You don't tell.
I lived in Portland, Oregon for 30 years. And the circuit was Washington, which is above Oregon. So they call it a circuit. Washington, they'll bring them down to Oregon. They'll transport them to Cali. And then they will go to Nevada. And then they will also exchange and sell too. And I think Prime, if y'all want to know more about it, it's a great movie. It gets intense, and it's called Trafficking. And I think it's on Prime, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it, but I saw that. I saw the title of that.
Yeah, it's good. It's really good. I've watched it a couple of times.
Yeah.
You said the movie's called Trafficking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and this young girl got involved in that world, and her boyfriend shot and killed her a couple months ago. She was 16. So it's real, and a lot of it happens here. All right. I think that's all I wanted to share about human trafficking. I want to move on. Let's see. Where's the other section I want to get to? Man, y'all know that already. So let's look at some cultural characteristics based on race and culture. And this is kind of what people are trying to harp on with the examination. Why the pass rates aren't that high, because our exam isn't culturally competent. And it's true. So this is their attempt to identify some of the characteristics based on culture. In an effort to become what they call culturally based, or embracing culturally based values. So for African Americans, kinship relationships are important, with grandparents being very involved in raising young children. Male and female roles are egalitarian, and often women work outside of the home. Children are expected to respect and obey their elders. There's a deep sense of mutual responsibility among members. Spirituality and church membership are important. And the leading cause of death among young African Americans between 10 and 24 is homicide.
Wow. Mr. Antoine, what did you have before that above? If you could scroll back down right quick. I want to take a picture of that.
Okay.
So you said we will get a copy of this when you update it fully?
Yes, when I update it, I'll give it to you. I just don't want to give it to you because some of this stuff is updated. And I just learned if I give people stuff, they take it as the gospel. Like, Mr. Butler, you ain't have such and such a here that was on my exam. So I stopped giving it that.
I didn't know go back down, homicide?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
Absolutely. That came out of the 80s.
Oh yeah, and it's gonna even be worse with the numbers we got now.
They put that, well, since you brought it up, I'm jumping on my soapbox. They put that into when they introduced redlining in the 50s and 60s, and they start pushing us into substandard living conditions and we didn't have access to all the, the other stuff that people have access to. That was on purpose. So what happened, as a consequence of that, you got a lot of people who were in these environments that didn't have jobs, they didn't have income, and you shoving those people in a situation where they start feeling hopeless, they'll start turning on each other. That's what they hope that happen. Then you introduce drugs and alcohol, right? So that trend is still continuing to happen for the most part. And so we do see that African Americans are doing better in this age group, right? And getting into different parts of the economy and the political system and education and stuff. So we are rising above those type of living conditions. But what happens is we're seeing what you call black flight. And that's when African Americans get education or get finances or get money and they leave, they don't come back and grab the youth. And so we have youth raising youth. And so this phenomenon continues because the mentoring component isn't there anymore. And the stuff that you used to learn at the dinner table on Sunday evenings with Big Mama and Mama and Uncle, that's not there anymore. So now you have a media raised youth who play video games, and it's easy to kill somebody on the video game and they just come back to life. Right. So but a lot of that, and it's gonna sound racist, but it's true. A lot of that wasn't our fault. A lot of that got put in our
These are what type of factors again? I'm sorry.
So these are what they call culturally based values. That's what they call them for your exam. So these are what we would be assuming when we're answering our test questions. We're thinking about these values before we answer the question. If I'm dealing with an African American person in the scenario, these are the factors that I should consider. Like, let me just pick one. So spirituality and church membership are important. So me being culturally based also means that I have to be culturally responsive. I have to respond to what I know about this set of people. So, and I'm saying this one because this is actually a test question. They may have in a scenario that you walk into a service, an African-American church service, and you see a person screaming, shouting, and falling on the floor. And it looks like all the symptoms of schizophrenia. Well, you walk up, especially you walk up in my church, that ain't schizophrenia. Y'all already know what that is.
It's a spirit.
The spirit movement, right? So they're saying you wouldn't diagnose this person with schizophrenia. That's culturally based behavior. So that's what they're meaning. So we're thinking about it.
And that would be like the cultural bound syndrome stuff, right? Like it's
absolutely
based on the culture that they do that type. Yeah.
That's DSM-4 stuff, but absolutely right. Absolutely right. Culturally bound syndrome. Asian Americans. And I think I extended this list, so I'll give y'all some ones that's not on here. So there is a great importance placed on family honor. I have a young lady who works in California. She's Asian American. And she was literally thinking about fighting her brother because her brother had dishonored their parents. He cursed in their presence. And she's 35. She's like, we about to go to blows. She's like, you don't curse in front of my parents. But honor is a big thing to them. Like, she reveres them. So that's something that's huge to them. The welfare of the family is more important than the welfare of the individual. Interdependence rather than independence is huge in Asian American culture. Their native language is important. So, like in particular, like first generation immigrants, they're big on keeping your native language. They want you to be bilingual. They don't want to lose that sense of their heritage. Individuals are expected to refrain from discussing personal problems with outsiders. So the numbers are really small when it comes to Asian Americans getting counseling. They just don't do it. You know, it's something that we talk about within our family. And African Americans too, especially men. It's so interesting because men come to me and you know they so macho, man. I don't even know why I'm talking to you, man. I don't really do the therapy thing, and you know I'm just here because my wife. And 50 minutes later they, oh no, really, they crash. You know that's how we do. But it's a lot of it is stigma. Spirituality, religion, and church attendance are important. It's the view that control, as is the view that control over life's events is external. So for Asian Americans, their culture, their heritage, and a lot of them spiritually fall under Buddhism and Hinduism, and that's really important in their culture. So some new ones that I'm adding to the list for Asian Americans. Having a mental illness is seen as bringing shame on the family. Also, they are taught to avoid eye contact and express emotions with strangers.
We're still on Asian, right?
Yes,
Can you repeat that again?
yes. So for strangers, they are taught to avoid eye contact and express their emotions. And then the last one is remembering that they have very structured and strategic roles for family members. So when you're working with them, it is important to know what that person's role is in the family.
What
Go ahead, Carol.
what was the one before eye contact?
That might have to help me out. I don't remember what I said. Oh, I think I said
Mental illness is seen as bringing shame to the family.
yes, thank you. They have structured roles for members. And then the last one, it's going to be an exam question for somebody if you get Asian American. The treatment of choice for this population would be direct, short-term problem-solving approach. Direct, short-term problem-solving approach. You're not going to get into drawn-out long-term therapy with them. You want to get into something maybe brief therapy, solution-focused therapy, task-centered treatment, something short-term. All right, let's go to our indigenous brothers and sisters, Native Americans. Same kind of belief system. Elders are held in high regard. Generosity is a value. That's actually what got their land taken from them. Rigid gender roles exist. Men do men stuff, women do women stuff. They rarely cross over. You'll see some, it's every now and then you'll see some of these progressive tribes where you see some of those gender roles overlap, but it's rare. They're usually outside of the tribe when they've done that. The belief system is that tribes are responsible for raising children, not just an individual, not just a family. They really do believe it takes a village to raise a child.
Me too.
Trust is placed in tribal decisions over decisions made by others outside the tribe. Going to give you some new ones that's not on here. It is very important to Native Americans that individuals listen rather than talk. Over talking is a turnoff to them in therapy. I'm automatically disqualified because I want to know what the feather mean, what the jacket mean. I want to know what the bird mean. I'm asking all type of questions. They're gonna kick me straight out.
Mhm.
And then lastly, to be effective with this population, the social worker may need to model self-disclosure and verbal expression. So they are interested in you sharing your personal experience before they open up to you.
Self-disclosure and what else?
Verbal expression.
Okay. I'm surprised unless I'm not seeing it. They big into storytelling too.
They are.
Uh-huh.
That's what you just said. They'd rather you listen than talk. So they
Mhm.
telling their story.
Yep.
And you said they expect what? That's the last thing. I'm sorry.
Say it again.
Mhm. The last one you just said, they expect something. I missed it.
I
I
said,
know they'd rather you listen than talk, and then you said they expect something else.
I said they want you to model self-disclosure and verbal expression.
I need to move this. Yes, okay.
Mhm. Please be familiar, and this is in your social work dictionary. If you're not familiar with it, go in your social work dictionary. That's one of the things that I encourage you all to get if you don't have. The 6th edition, if you can. Go research ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act. That's an exam question.
What is
The
it called?
ICWA, ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act. It is a constitutional, U.S. constitutional act in a nutshell that says that we must respect the tribe's decisions over tribal matters before our own laws. For Native Americans, they have their own laws, their own judicial system, and we respect that unless it has infringed upon our laws. So your social work dictionary gives you more insight, but that is on somebody's exam, I guarantee you. All right. Hispanics. Most Hispanics believe that God is an active force in everyday life. And for most of them, they're going to be Catholic. Much like the Native American, and this is a cultural term you'll need to know. It's called familismo. It's the value over the family, over the community. And if you closely observe them, they really mean that. That culture, like none other, can work together.
Can you spell that, please?
F-A-M-I.
F-A-M-I.
L-I-S-M-O.
That's the value over the family rather than the cultural?
Say it again.
What's the definition of that again?
So family over the value of the family over the individual. Or the community over the individual. This is an exam question. Machismo, have y'all heard that term before?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, it's important for men to display masculinity. So you'll see all forms of expression in that. If you visit their homes, one of the quickest way to offend them is to start talking to the wife before you talk to the male.
Mhm.
Also, in their community, eye contact can be interpreted as you challenging them or trying to intimidate them. This is the men. So if you're not verbally communicating to them and you're just staring at them, it can be interpreted as you challenging or trying to intimidate them.
Can you spell machismo? How did you pronounce it?
Machismo. MACHISMO. Machismo.
I have the opportunity to work with the younger generation at the community college I still teach for.
Mhm.
And they've taken away all that masculine, they can't stand it.
Really?
Yeah, and then they call themselves Latina X, Latinas. They prefer Latina versus Mexican, and yeah.
Mm.
And I don't know if you guys know anything about Puerto Vallarta. I got a chance to visit there, and it was shockingly surprising to me to see the amount of gay Hispanic men and all the stuff that they're changing. It was very mind-blowing.
Yeah, LGBT is really emphatic about reaching across genders and across cultures
Mhm.
with their cause. So it don't matter where you go now. You know, you're gonna have somebody who's a part of that community.
And that, I always say that's the only thing, that's the one thing that God made a difference between, and society makes it okay.
Yep. There may be some information on your exam about the coming out process, the LGBT community. And just remember now it's LGBTQIA. And there's a hyphen something. I hadn't caught up to that one yet. But I know it is LGBTQIA. So that's lesbian,
Gay.
gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual. And I used to do a training on the LGBT community where I taught everybody what the different flags mean, what the different colors mean. I hadn't done it in a long time. I may come out and do it again. But there's different terminology that you got to be abreast of: asexual, pansexual, non-sexual, genderqueer, gender sex, intersex, interqueer. They all have different expressions and definitions.
Then the non-binary now, right?
Uh-huh. So basically this process, it was something that kind of came out in the late 90s, but it's when somebody has this identity confusion and they go through stages of eventually revealing their sexual preference.
And which one, what, the intersex? I don't think I've heard that one before. So what does that mean, intersex?
I think the intersex is when you can switch back and forth.
Oh.
A lot of them have overlap. Like what is it, hydrogenous? I can't remember now. I have to go back and look at it. But a lot of them have overlap and sound the same. Because like asexual, which means no sexual preference, sounds like another one. A lot of them sound alike to me. But the community know what they mean. I could never remember them all. All right. So here are some of the terms, and these are Oh, I might have written down some of the new ones. Let's see. Okay, I did write that. So for those that don't know, gay and lesbian is the overall term. You're attracted to the same sex. Bisexual, attracted to both men and women. Pansexual, it's a term used to describe an attraction that is based on not the individual, not the sex, and the term can be used for either male or female. So it's based upon the individual, not the sex. Then we have transgender.
I'm sorry, can you explain that pansexual a little bit different from me other than that definition? Because I'm a
Yeah,
little
that's
confused.
just, yeah, pansexual is usually used for individuals who say, I don't like such and such because they have a penis, or I don't like such and such because they have a vagina. Like, I like them because of the person that they are. So they separate the person and the sexual anatomy.
Okay.
Yeah. Intersex is just a new word for hermaphrodite. When I was growing up, that's the only term I knew. But it's called intersex. And then there's gender queer and intergender. This is catch-all terms for gender identities other than man and woman. Individual may self-identify as being, oh, I got a typo right. I gotta fix that. Both man and woman, as being neither man nor woman, or feeling completely outside of the gender binary. And that is a term, I just can't remember what it is, when you're not male or female. You don't even ascribe to gender terminology, period. There's a name for it. I just can't remember it. But these are the ones to be the most familiar with as far as your exam is concerned. Gay and lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, transgender, intersex, genderqueer, intergender, or intergender, they're the same thing. All right, questions about that? If it feels confusing, don't worry, I'm confused too about a lot of it.
You said that I just Googled what you said when you don't identify as a man or a woman. That's what they call it, non-binary.
Yes, non-binary.
Repeat that.
That's right.
Go ahead, Antoine.
No, non-binary. That's what I couldn't figure out. I couldn't figure out what it was. Hold on, let me go back to it so I can highlight it for you. Can you see me highlight this? See, feeling completely outside of the gender binary. That's when they don't ascribe to male or female. That they don't even put themselves in that classification system. They feel like that's just like government made.
Wow.
So I couldn't think of what that term was, but it's non-binary.
And then I guess that's when they start saying they, we, and us, all that kind of stuff goes under that, right?
Right.
And I just wanted to mention, I've worked with some kids that use these terms. I just try to stay in my role as a facilitator. But my first person that I met was telling me she was pansexual. She kind of explained what that meant to me. So that's how I learned about pansexual.
Gotcha. All right. Please know this. The 1990 Americans Disability Act. This is one that I would encourage you to go in your social work dictionary and review. This outlawed discrimination against individuals with disabilities. They may literally ask you what year that act was enacted. I want to read this just for the sake of your knowledge. So when a disabled individual seeks social work services, the social worker should not automatically assume that the disability is the focus of treatment. The social worker should acknowledge the disability when appropriate and ask the client what he or she hopes to address in the treatment process. Treatment issues may include grieving losses, discrimination, social relationships, developing independent living skills, barriers to normal functioning, and rehabilitation. So in other words, what they're saying is a person may come in for one of these issues, but you see a disability present, right? We can't make the assumption because the disability is present, that's the reason that they're in our office. And if we do that, then it can be considered discrimination. Actually, even asking people about their disability in an interview process can be considered discrimination. Like, hey, I noticed that you use a cane. You want to tell me a little bit about that? That can be seen as discrimination. Or if somebody's blind, or whatever the disability is. They want to make sure that we're not identifying that as a focus of treatment if they haven't identified it. And there's people who win this case every day based on the ADA. All right. So I do just want to review these terms just for the sake of you knowing them, because it may be on your exam. And I think I added one too. So prejudice is not the same thing as racism. Prejudice is the intentional, based on what our social work definition. I know y'all have heard different definitions. We're talking about social work. So prejudice is I made that too big. Is the intentional taking away of certain choices, benefits, or other opportunities because of an individual's minority status. So it's really where we prejudge the person and we haven't given them what they need. Note this term called critical multiculturalism. This is a stance that embraces diversity and opposes depression. And it's really just to make sure the Eurocentric viewpoint doesn't oppress minorities. That's really what the focus is. Racism, the practice of discrimination and prejudice based on racial classification, supported by the power to enforce that prejudice. There is an updated definition that I just want to read to you, but I like it. It says racism is the belief that races have distinct characteristics that are hereditary and cultural, and some of these characteristics endow certain races with an intrinsic superiority over others. Racism is usually directed toward people of color. Racism carries with it attitudes and behaviors that range from dislike to outward discriminatory behavior such as avoidance, aggression, and violence. Racism can also be projected in more subtle actions such as language and microaggressions. I like that definition because it really unfolds the idea that minorities have a hereditary disadvantage. That's really what the belief is. Our heredity puts us at a disadvantage. I thought that was a strong definition. Therefore, the majority can exercise power because they are, by heredity, they are superior.
How old is that definition? Like within the last 3 years, maybe?
The one I just gave you?
Yeah.
Oh, that's like 60 days old.
Oh, I was going to say, because that's exactly what we're facing right now. So
Just got this, not too long ago. Ethnicity. socially constructed classification of groups. We know what that is: oppression, silencing the voice of ostracized people. Ageism, self-explanatory. Heterosexism, that might be new to somebody. A belief that everyone is and should be heterosexual, right? And that's another word for homophobia. It's just an updated word, heterosexism. Ethnocentrism, your own ethnic group is superior. Let's see. Marginalization. This is when people find that they are on the fringe of political, social, or economic consciousness. The sense of invisibility results in decisions being made by those in power that may be harmful simply because the needs were not considered. So I often say to people, if you did not get invited to the table, you are on the menu. And there are decisions that get made regarding people's lives, in particular, disadvantaged, disenfranchised minority individuals, at a table that they never even know was there. They didn't even know the meeting existed. And so their lives are affected in a negative way. And they're wondering why they have so few access to resources, or they don't have the socioeconomic equality that they should when they see everybody around them in the same situation seem to be advancing and getting access, because marginalization is all about access. When they don't see it, they can't figure out why. It's because they've been marginalized and don't know it.
Mm-hmm. You can be at the table and still on the menu and don't know it.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, Lord.
Bad, but it's true.
It is so true. Assimilation and acculturation, those are social work terms you need to know. So assimilation means being absorbed into the cultural tradition of the dominant society and consequently losing one's historical identity. Absorbed into the culture and tradition of the dominant society and consequently losing one's historical identity. Asian Americans are horrified of that. Native Americans are horrified of that.
This is always on the test too.
Yes. They want us to know these two terms.
Yeah.
What these cultures would rather see. Go ahead, Teresa.
No, I'm just reading it again, putting it in my head. I'm sorry.
What they would rather see is acculturation, where we adapt, but we don't lose our identity. So what we would prefer is acculturation over assimilation, because we want to keep our heritage and our cultural norms, right? That's what makes this country. So, because we're all supposed to be able to maintain some semblance of who we are without having to be somebody else. So assimilation and acculturation, those are test questions.
It just seems like it's a little tricky with that. I know it's not, because you have to learn the definition, but if I assimilate with something, like I just make myself familiar with it. But if I acculturate with it, like I become it. But that's quite the difference in the definitions, right? But that just makes sense.
Yeah, so think about it this way. Let's say you had 2 bags, right? You were traveling with, and you took those 2 bags into another country. Well, when you got into that other country, the country may tell you, in order for you to be a part of us, we need you to leave those 2 bags behind. Those don't fit in this new culture. If you leave those 2 bags behind, let's just say those bags are your identity and your culture, you've assimilated, right? Let's say you're taking those same 2 bags, same situation, you're going into that new culture, and they say, well, in order to be a part of our culture, you got to leave these 2 bags behind. But you may say, well, I'll embrace the identity part but I'm not going to leave my heritage behind. So you keep one of those bags. That's acculturation.
Okay,
I'm gonna blend in, but I'm not gonna
I'm not
forget where
giving
I
up.
came from.
okay.
So when a person forgets where they come from, they're assimilated. And so we see a lot of grassroots organizations that have this flavor of acculturation because they understand the importance of that in an ethnocentric environment. That's exactly why the National Association of Black Social Workers was born. So it wasn't assimilation, it was acculturation. That's why you see these different ethno groups and committees and organizations and clubs pop up because they're trying to keep their sense of identity. Indians are huge on that. When I mean dot Indians, not feather Indians, are big on that, not losing their identity. That's why they make sure that they keep their own language. A lot of times they'll stay within a certain work classification. You only can be 1, 2, or 3. You could be a doctor, a lawyer, or this. I've worked with a few Indian clients, and they've told me, it's like my parents told me I got 3 options: doctor, lawyer. Because one lady I was talking to, she told her parents she wanted to be a social worker, and they almost disowned her. It's like, no, you got 3 options, you know. So, but they do that because they want to maintain some sense of control over who they become in this country. So,
And I want to piggyback off what you just said. I met a 7th grader who knew he was going to be a cardiologist. He was Indian. He knew the college, he knew everything because it was already mapped out. So now that you're saying those 3 choices, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and if you get 3, you're lucky because they usually tell you what you're going to do. But I think this new generation is more progressive and they're getting around more. You know, they have access to more stuff. They're being a little bit. These parents are being a little bit more liberal, but they will cut them off. Like if they don't go into like the medical field, the legal field, if they don't marry within their race, they'll cut them off. Like they know it as a child that that's what's going to happen. So if you choose that, you're just choosing to get out here and not having the support from any. And when I say cut you off, I don't mean just your immediate family. I mean your extended family and your family back home. All those holidays, celebrations, festivals, you're not invited. And that's just how they roll.
So they still arranging marriages and life in that culture.
Oh, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. So I'm gonna give you one more, then we're gonna stop because we're overtired because it's just a new one. Write this down. FATISM. 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 This is when a person has been discriminated against, judged, or criticized because of their physical characteristics. Because of their physical characteristics. That could be your skin is too light, too dark, you're overweight, your hair. We just recently saw, I can't think of the bill that they just passed where they can't discriminate against you because of your hair.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the name of it.
Crown Act.
What is it called?
Again?
The Crown Act.
The Crown Act.
Okay.
Get it, Sierra. The Crown Act. A lot of that came out of this, of the fatism that was happening with African American women in their hair. So
Can you
wanna
give that full definition again?
Yes. So this is a term used to describe when a person is being criticized, they're being judged, any of these words, shunned, rejected, ridiculed, any of that, because of physical characteristics. And go ahead.
Is there a difference between that and discrimination, or they're one and the same?
So fatism is specifically physical characteristics.
Okay.
So we could discriminate against somebody because of their physical characteristics, yes. But fatism is specifically something physical going on with you. And the assumption is that whatever that physical characteristic is, you can't control it. That's the essence of the definition. It's something that's uncontrollable.
And give me an example of one of the physical characteristics that we would be thinking about.
This African-American wide nose that I can't control.
Oh, okay.
So I go in the
With my
interview.
tight curly hair.
Yeah, they say this brother nose too wide. And we can't make him the face of our franchise or our job.
Or lips or something like that. Okay.
And I say that respectfully because, and I'm not gonna get into it, but I just have many soapboxes here and there. Y'all know me by now. Because one of the things that happened with leadership in this country is that we were given a litmus test and a definition of what leaders were. It came from Greek philosophy that was inherited by the Romans that took over, that got ingrained into Western philosophy. That if you don't have slim eyes, fair skin, a slender nose, and if you're not an extrovert, then you can't be a leader. So that was in our textbooks. And so a lot of leadership philosophy came out of that. So people weren't getting hired in these corporations in the early 1900s, the 20s and 30s, 40s and 50s. They were well qualified, but they didn't fit these physical characteristics. So people were saying, well, they're not going to be able to lead this company. And that happened a lot. It still happens. It still happens. And so I use that because you go into an interview on the phone, they thought you were Caucasian. You get there, they look at you and they say, no, you can't do the job.
That happened to me.
That goes
before.
past just racism. They can look at you physically and say, we're not gonna let you in no boardroom with your natural hair like that, with your fro hanging out. They ain't gonna never say it, but it's true.
That happened to me on my first interview after college. I had a phone interview, and then I got ready to go in for my in-person interview. The lady came out and she looked for me, called me by my name, and I stood up and she was still looking. Then she said, "Oh, you're Teresa?" I knew right then and there that I was not going to be hired, and I wasn't.
Wow.
That's a wrap.
I wasn't hired.
That's a wrap. Yeah, we got a lot of policies and stuff that's trying to right that wrong, but it still happens. It still happens. And not just by our Caucasian counterparts.
No, it's even worse with yours.
Yeah. But anywho, all right. Anything pressing? I know we over time that anybody want to share?
This is not pressing, but I wanted to ask you this question. If I wanted to get practice on diagnoses, I know you mentioned like the veterans, but if I wanted to get a little bit more practice, I'm a hands-on person.
Okay.
So I can read all day and read. Some stuff sticks, but I'm just wondering, like, I did have a lady to offer a job at a mental health center, but I don't want to just jump in. Like, I want to gradually or practice my skills. What advice would you give me? I've thought about working at the VA, just a thought, because I'm a thinker. I thought about working at the VA maybe because I also know you can transfer from state to state, but I don't want to jump in before I feel like I'm 100% or at least 90% ready. Just what feedback would you give me?
So I would give you two scenarios. One is going to be a little bit easier and more in your control. So I would, and I literally did this when I was trying to learn about mental health. I pulled up as many videos as I can think of people assessing people with specific mental illnesses. You can pull up the video and say, bipolar disorder. They give you role plays, case scenarios, breakdowns, and all of that. And then that's free. And then, you can do that while you're cooking the duck. My next advice would be, and sometimes people say I want to get experience with diagnosis by going to work for a mental health agency. You may get exposure that way. I'm telling you this out of experience. I ran 3 of them. That's not going to be your best experience with assessment and diagnosis. It's going someplace where they're going to let you be the assessor. If they let you assess people, do the intake, that's how you get the most experience with assessment and diagnosis. So anywhere that's gonna let you do intake, you're going, that's where you're gonna get the most experience.
That's good feedback. I was doing I was with the assessor yesterday, and I heard all the information in my mind. You know, I'm going through, and borderline personality stood out to me because of all the information, or bipolar. So I just realized that listening is helpful to me, but I also wanted to be a little bit more hands-on, just to have experience. So that was good feedback. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, and working with somebody is going to help you, you know, but once again, if they just got that one diagnosis, then you're just working on that one diagnosis. You know, so yeah. All right, any other questions? All righty. Well, thank y'all so much. I'll have y'all certificates to y'all within the next 48 hours, and we'll meet again on the 3rd. No, the 2nd. We'll meet again on the 2nd, so I'll send y'all out the flyer.
But one quick question before you say bye. I know you was wrapping
Sure.
up. How can I make up for what I missed?